Yes, so New Zealand has received a preliminary proposal from the United States requesting help in opening the Strait of Hormuz, possibly as part of a coalition, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, that would restore access to the strait. So yes, apparently we're just one of a number of countries that have received the proposal. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters, not surprisingly, says we're seeking more information and as such won't be making a decision anytime soon. And geopolitical analyst Dr. Geoffrey Miller is with us. Geoffrey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tim.
So, help with opening the Straits of Hormuz. What sort of help what does that look like in practical terms, do you think?
It all sounds rather innocuous, Tim, from what you've read out there. And I think listeners might be confused because this all might seem quite familiar because Christopher Luxon attended a virtual meeting led by Sir Keir Starmer back in April on a plan to patrol the Strait of Hormuz and ensure freedom of navigation. What's important to know here is that this is completely separate. So this US-led initiative called the Maritime Freedom Construct, it all sounds very nice and about getting the strait open and everything, and who wouldn't want that? But actually, I think it's a Trojan horse here for actually getting other countries involved in breaking the Iranian blockade by force. And if you read through some of the details that the Wall Street Journal had in its report, it was leaked the diplomatic cable from the United States. It kind of makes that clear. Eventually, you get to it. It talks all about information sharing and these kinds of things. But it says in the cable, and I quote, "Collective action is essential to demonstrate unified resolve and impose meaningful costs on Iranian obstruction of transit through the strait." So I think that what it's really about is building a military coalition to go in by force, stop the Iranian blockade or break the Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and solve things militarily. And I can see why Winston Peters is kicking for touch on all of this because it's highly sensitive and it's very different to the British proposal or the British-French proposal, which is really after a ceasefire is in place, more of a monitoring and surveillance and patrol mission, where I think New Zealand probably could make some contribution.
So should we be more interested in looking at a plan? I think France and UK, a France and UK-led plan as well. Would that be a better move for us, or does that sort of enable Washington to sort of wash its hands of the whole thing and leave us with the bag of whatever we're holding?
Yeah, I think they're two different proposals, Tim. I think the US one is one for right now to try and aggressively break Iran's blockade by force. The British and French proposal is sort of under the assumption that there will be some deal done. So in the ceasefires in place, that there will be some deal done between Iran and the United States. And then a multinational coalition made up of dozens of countries potentially under British and French leadership will go in there, will clear the strait of mines. I mean, that's not something New Zealand can do, but it's something that the British and the French, the Europeans can do. And then the likes of New Zealand, the smaller countries, will come in with a frigate or two and patrol the strait and just give confidence to commercial shipping companies that they can transit through the strait safely. And that sends a signal also to insurance companies to reduce the premiums that, look, this is a safe waterway, the world's militaries are there, patrolling the strait, it is safe to cross. And that, in one way, one of the biggest problems that we've had in this crisis, quite apart from the fact that there are drones and missiles that have been flying across the strait, is simply that insurance companies won't give you insurance. If you want to go through the strait, you're on your own, and shipping companies say, well, we're not going through the strait. And that's why the blockade has been so successful. It's worked very well from Iran's perspective.
Is this something where Donald Trump, this is sort of like a transactional strategy, his approach to it? It's like, just ask these guys to step up, but really what's behind it is really the danger of escalation and being drawn into a wider conflict.
Indeed, because you think, what will Iran do if a whole lot of countries come to the US, come to the United States aid and start this blockade-busting mission? I think probably they will fight back, and I think suddenly the war is back on, and suddenly New Zealand and other countries are on the American side. And I think, as I said, well, this is what it's really about. It's a Trojan horse for getting the likes of New Zealand on board and supporting the United States.
So if I'm anyone
in this war,
if I'm anyone in the decision-making part of our government, I'd be listening to you and go, "There's no bloody way we're going anywhere near this."
Indeed, I think that with Donald Trump, you don't want to say no. You just don't want to say yes, and you want to keep saying you're considering the proposal and studying it, but you just don't want to actually give a firm no, because that will make him angry. And you see what's happened with Germany. Most recently, in the last couple of days, Donald Trump says he's withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany as punishment because Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, spoke out against the United States, against Donald Trump, and said it was a humiliation what they were suffering at the moment. That didn't go down well. I mean, you've seen others like Spain and Italy as well have come in for a tongue lashing by Donald Trump and for threats. I mean, Donald Trump threatened a trade embargo against Spain for their position on the war. And so New Zealand wants to make itself as small a target as possible, keep their head down, not say, no, Mr. Trump, we're not doing this, just keep studying it, and eventually hope that it all just dies a death in the background, because hopefully there will be some deal done, and that makes all of this moot. And I think that's perhaps one of the most encouraging things over the last couple of days. There's a new Iranian proposal for a deal that will see the blockades lifted, a mutual lifting of the blockade in a first phase of a deal done over a period of up to a month, and putting the nuclear issue to one side. Now, that's not going to be to Donald Trump's liking, but I think perhaps it's the only way forward here is to have as simple as a deal as possible just on the blockade issue, and then move to the next phase, because I think dealing with all of those issues at once was just creating a very, very complicated situation. And this is still complicated stuff, what we're dealing with, and I don't think Donald Trump will like it, because what does he get out of this war? Nothing at the end of the day, apart from a whole lot of chaos, and it's difficult to see what Donald Trump wins out of this, and he loves to project himself as the winner. But it would be good for the whole world if we actually had a lifting of the blockade, even if that wasn't a permanent end to potentially all the issues between the United States and Iran, just some kind of more durable ceasefire that had that lifting of the blockades, because what we've got at the moment is this sort of uneasy truce where there is a ceasefire in place and yet the blockades are still firmly in place and ships are not transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, even if drones and missiles are not crossing the strait like they were back in March and early April.
Is that, in fact, our sort of not get out of jail free, but our strategy is say we look forward to helping once certain conditions have been fulfilled, like New Zealand will play its part, and then we just basically outline under what conditions we will help once the hostilities have finished? Yeah,
I think that's what New Zealand effectively is doing. I don't think it will probably want to say that in so many words to Donald Trump. Okay. I think it's probably the smart move, and probably what the government is doing, in effect, is just saying, well, we're looking at the proposal carefully. They've probably got no intention of signing up to this US proposal. I think New Zealand will be involved probably in some form in that British and French mission, which is more of a patrol and a monitoring mission once there's a ceasefire in place, a durable ceasefire. Once the blockades have been lifted, I think that mission will get underway. I mean, there needs to be some kind of mission to just clear the mines that have been made in the Strait, and then just ensure that traffic is flowing through the Strait. But I think one thing that New Zealand really could contribute more towards, Tim, is in the deal-making behind the scenes and the diplomacy, because I think ultimately the issue is that you can't solve this conflict by military means. I think the last 2 months have taught us that, and that we need a diplomatic deal, a political solution. And it may have escaped some listeners, but on Thursday night, I think Christopher Luxon had phone calls with the President of the United Arab Emirates and also the Sultan of Oman. For example, these are two of the Gulf states that are there on the front lines. And these aren't the first phone calls that Christopher Luxon has held with Gulf leaders. He's talked with the Emir of Qatar. He had earlier calls with the President of the UAE, for example. So there's a lot of, I think, things going on behind the scenes. And I think this is where New Zealand could be particularly valuable, speaking up for dialogue, diplomacy, de-escalation, and in the peace building behind the scenes, because this, in the end, I mean, you look at what New Zealand's military capabilities are and its naval capabilities, we know that they're not really substantial. So what can we do? Yes, we can send one frigate up there, and New Zealand has sent frigates up to the Middle East for decades, actually. The Kaha was up there last year. But the reality is that for a small state like New Zealand, military capabilities are quite limited in scope.
Well, what can we do?
When it comes to diplomacy, is all about people fundamentally, and I think small countries like New Zealand can be quite useful in terms of go-between, and that's what we need at the moment. Lots of discussion in the go-betweens. Pakistan has been doing that, but I think there's room for plenty of others to be involved, and often it's small countries like Oman that become involved in all of this. So I think New Zealand could definitely play its part, along with the likes of Switzerland, Oman. All the states can get involved and keep those negotiations going, because there is no military solution.
Well, just in terms of the cessation of hostilities, the 60-day declaration that the war had been terminated, what pressure, because I think Trump needs some assent from Congress to continue. So how does that affect, just what's going to happen with the tensions between Iran and the US, which obviously need to be resolved to the point that we can actually get on with things?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That was really about the War Powers Act, and really it was more of a technicality than anything. Look, we are in a ceasefire phase. We've been in a ceasefire for almost a month now, and yet oil is still at $108 a barrel, Brent oil, and that tells you everything about the situation we're in. We're in a pretty tough spot at the moment because of these twin blockades, these mutual blockades. The war could restart at any moment, and Donald Trump was actually briefed on Thursday by CENTCOM on US Central Command on potential new military operations. And I think we have to see that as a real possibility here, that Donald Trump will resort to force and resort to further military action to try and break Iran and try and break this blockade by force. Whether or not New Zealand or anyone else joins him, I think he is hell-bent on winning here, in his view, and what he sees as winning.
Well, that's not good, is it? That's not the way we're going to resolve it, by one side being bent on winning at any cost, sort of thing.
There's a real possibility, unfortunately, that we're going to have another round of conflict here before this is solved around the negotiating table. And I think this is where New Zealand needs to be advocating very strongly behind the scenes diplomatically, is to do a deal now. Do this deal of lifting the blockades and then talking further, because a military solution isn't a solution. We've seen that. We had almost 40 days of war. It got us nowhere. It just led to a lot of destruction, not just in Iran, but across the Gulf states and across the wider Middle East. We don't want to go back to that. It didn't actually solve anything. And for Donald Trump, he needs to just understand that is just not a way forward, that he has to go to diplomacy, and he has to, I think, come to terms with the fact that maybe he has lost here, and that's a tough pill for him to swallow.
Well, he's not going to do that.
The US midterm elections are coming up in 6 months, and Donald Trump's approval rating is already at the lowest it's been. It's at 34%, which is also about the same number of Americans who support the war, same proportion who support the war. Things are already quite in a bad way. They could get worse. And Donald Trump's own party, supposedly, Republicans, are really going to be in for it when petrol in the United States is above the US $4 a gallon mark, which, it's a lot lower than it is here, but that's very high for the United States. And remember, they're going into what they call driving season in the United States, the busy summer travel period. Yeah. And having this war continuing, where Donald Trump wants to go off to China in a couple of weeks and meet Xi Jinping, is coming up to summer travel period, summer holiday period in the United States. The midterms are looming. Does Donald Trump really want to go through the US summer with these blockades still in place and no solution? Probably not.
He will need to frame it, though, as a win. There'll be people within the American administration be presenting ideas to him as how he can frame it as a win, because there's no way he's going to admit a loss. Because otherwise it's going to go on forever.
Indeed. And so I think behind the scenes, this is what needs to be happening to try and give Donald Trump off-ramp, because it's really all about his decision-making and thought process. Yeah. And to give him some way of casting this as a victory. And I think even the Iranian side realizes that they've put forward in some of their proposals just in the last few days, things like they will do things first. They will lift their blockade first before Donald Trump lifts his, for example. And that would allow Donald Trump to tout this as some great victory. And as a sign of generosity, I'm going to also temporarily lift my blockade for a short period. Things like this can be done. Okay. When it comes to the announcement, the rhetoric around things. But in effect, Iran will have won this war, but I think they largely have already, simply by surviving. The regime is still in place. Remember, Donald Trump was talking about regime change when he launched this war 2 months ago. The regime is still very much firmly in place. Iran still has all of its enriched uranium. I think those issues have to be worked through, but that's probably for another day. Right now, these blockades simply need to be lifted, and I think New Zealand behind the scenes needs to be working the diplomatic track, and I think that's probably the most valuable thing and most valuable contribution that New Zealand can make right now on diplomacy, rather than, look, we can send a frigate up there. I think we probably will when it comes to this surveillance and patrol mission of the Strait of Hormuz led by the British and the French down the track. But I think we can do things right now, and all they require is our voice, really. And Christopher Luxon has been using that with his calls behind the scenes with other world leaders.
Okay.
But that goes right the way down through the foreign ministry and Winston Peters, the foreign minister, and all the other diplomats. So I think there's lots that New Zealand can be doing right now.
Okay. Hey, thanks so much for your time, Jeffrey. Great to speak to you. That is Jeffrey Miller. He is a geopolitical analyst. We'll take your calls on your response to that as well. Obviously, we wouldn't want Donald Trump to listen to the interview with Jeffrey where he's basically saying he's lost it. But yeah, there needs to be an off-ramp from him, doesn't it? But should we be involved in responding to this request? I think, the clear answer is we should steer clear of it as much as we can.